Hi there. This video centers on learner diversity. Right? So whenever we step into a classroom, most likely the students that we have in that class are going to come from different backgrounds. Right? And so we want to consider how can we still effectively teach each one of those individual students, taking into consideration those different backgrounds and how they may be approaching the class from different perspectives, right? So some of the types of diversity that we're talking about here, we can look at things like culture, race and ethnicity, gender, immigration status, language will be a big one, socioeconomic status, and even something like intelligence, right? And so it's difficult at times because depending on the size of the class, we have to make sure everyone is learning and we're engaging all students, but each of them might be learning in different ways. And we have to be very mindful of how their particular situations may impact that learning process, right? So, for example, if we look at something just like language, right? So we have someone who's coming in and English is their second language, right? So they have like double duty here. Not only are they trying to learn English and develop those language skills with that, but at the same time, we're asking them to learn the content that everybody else in the class is learning. All right, so they're having like double duty, and that's extra work. And so anything we can do to be kind of mindful of that, right? Even if we look at things like gender, right? So when we look at girls and boys, particularly in like elementary school ages, there's a lot of differences there on how they might be in the classroom. Right, so little boys tend to be a little more fidgety, right? They move around a lot, and so sometimes mistakenly it's shown that, or it's perceived that they may be misbehaving, and that's not the case, right? But even then, as you look forward and you kind of go forward to like middle school and high school, boys might be more likely to raise their hand and provide an answer, and so they get kind of called on more and they get more attention, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the girls in the class don't know the answer, right? They might just be, for whatever reason, less inclined to participate or to raise their hand or go out of the way to try to provide the answer. So it's like knowing those things, what are some strategies we could then employ to make sure we're still reaching everyone, right? So can we make sure we're calling on girls? Can we make sure we have an understanding why boys might be a little fidgety? Can we maybe do whatever we can to help someone who's trying to learn another language in addition to the content, right? When we look at socioeconomic status, that's another type of diversity where, generally speaking, the higher socioeconomic status you have, the more access to resources you have, right? The more things you have available to you. Whereas, like, let's say someone is on the lower end of that spectrum who's maybe struggling with poverty, these are individuals who maybe they're not paying attention in class because they didn't eat breakfast that day, or they don't know if they're going to be able to eat dinner that night. And they're so kind of focused on that. Like, how can we get them to care about learning about math when they have these more pressing issues at hand? And so we just want to consider the individual, right? And we want to create a classroom where students feel welcomed, valued, and respected. So on our end, that does require more effort, right? So there are different strategies here. One thing that the research is pretty clear on, though, is that if we try an approach of, if we look at race and ethnicity, if we try racial color blindness, right? So we just see everybody exactly the same. We're not going to take into account race. What we find is that, generally speaking, that's ineffective as a strategy. Right? It just doesn't work as well. It's better to acknowledge the differences and have open discussions about them, right? So this goes back, though, to creating an atmosphere where students feel welcome, valued, and respected, so those conversations can go better, right? And then just different cognitive biases that we need to be aware of with this. A lot of it's going to come from stereotypes, right? So this is something that our brain is almost like programmed to do. It helps us get information processed very, very quickly about individuals. So we want to try to understand someone, who they are, as quickly as possible. So what our mind tends to do is say, okay, I think this person falls into this group. And if they do fall into that group, what I can then do is take everything I know about that group and apply it to that person, right? It's a very quick way to try to best understand somebody, right? It's our brain acting efficiently, but not necessarily effectively, right? So we have to be aware that those stereotypes exist, that that's how our brain is naturally working, so we can avoid the prejudice, we can avoid the discrimination. We want to make sure everyone is treated fairly, equally, and we're taking into consideration the diversity that we're going to see with our students.